Before automobiles, the most popular form of transportation was the bicycle. Bikes became a big fad of the industrial age as people sought better ways to get from place to place. But as the bicycle craze began to wane, inventors were finding ways to combine technologies to create a personal vehicle propelled by something other than legs or horses. The development of the horseless carriage was an outgrowth of four different technologies: the bicycle, the steam engine, the internal combustion engine, and the electric engine. Most of the early car manufacturers came to the business through their pursuit of inventions in the bicycle, wagon, or carriage industries. People like Alexander Winton, Henry Ford, and R.E. Olds were all building their own version of an automobile. However, true American car manufacturing began in 1896 when the Duryea brothers began producing their motor wagon. By the turn of the 20th century, most folks had heard of cars, but very few had seen one, until the automobile received its public debut at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. 140 automobiles were driven, shipped, sent by rail, pushed, pulled, and towed from across the world to be housed at the 16-acre, magnificent Palace of Transportation. Although the supposed star of the palace was the railroad industry and its technology, it was the automobile that attracted some of the greatest interest from millions of visitors. After the World's Fair, everyone wanted one of the new automobiles. With the average car costing over $1,000 in 1905 and the American average worker's wage at $500 a year, cars were a rich man's toy. But Henry Ford was about ready to change all that. With the introduction of his Model T in 1909, the car industry boomed, and by 1915, there were over 100 American car manufacturers.
Tom, talking about the World's Fair, I think if you look at the pictures, it's just amazing, the size of the building. And I can't imagine what it must have been like for somebody from Fulton, somebody from Callaway County, to have gone all the way to St. Louis and to have seen those magnificent buildings. And it would have been the first time that most of them would have seen any kind of an automobile. Right. There were several different things down there, lots of different ways to get around the fair in types of automobiles. And it just had to have been mind-boggling to those people. A lot of them, the Palace of Electricity, if you look at the pictures when that building is lit up at night, it's just had to be just, really something for those people to see. And I'm sure in the technology that fair showed everybody. I mean, it was not just automobiles, it was a tremendous amount of technology from the whole fair that brought about a lot of things.
The Palace of Transportation, which is pictured pretty close to the entry to the museum, was like several acres. 16 acres.
16 acres.
And its focus, actually, at that point was trains. And most of the visitors would have gotten there on trains. But then there were 160 cars in there, a lot of them French, and I think a lot of them electric. The early ones had diverse fuels, if you want to call them that, electric and steam, and it's amazing. And that they seem to have been preferred at the time. I guess probably because they were quieter, for one thing.
What impact did the automobile have on Fulton?
Well, I would say probably your business impact would be the major thing, that people came to town where they would have gone to their little communities, like if you lived in the Shamrock area or the Concord area or the Guthrie area, you shopped in that little area. You came to town when you had to pay your taxes, or you came when you came for stock sales. But I think when the cars came along, it was easier to get to town, and people made more trips to town, and there would have been an influx in the number of businesses. And Saturday, I guess, was a big deal. When I worked in Avaz, Mr. Eddie Wood would tell me that they would come to town and they would just spend Saturday in town and do their business, and they'd stay and visit and see who was in town, and it was an all-day affair. And we've been trying to determine who had the first car in Fulton. We know that Dr. Green McCall had a very early vehicle, and Bill's not able to exactly tell me what it is from the picture. It's not a real good picture, so we're going to have to do some more research and see if we can find out exactly when Dr. McCall got his car. But
when did they first pave the streets of Fulton?
They started in 1911, and they did different sections. At that time, the business was strictly around the square, And so I believe the first section was 4th Street between Court and Market, and then they just did it in sections and around town. I do have a funny story about my grandfather got and I don't know if it was a Model T or not, I don't know my cars, but it would have been early on, it would have been like 1914 or 15, I think, he had a car. And my story that I always heard was Grandpa was in town and turned the curve too sharp and turned the car over and broke my grandmother's leg. Well, I found an article in the newspaper where actually what happened is Grandfather just misjudged meeting another car and didn't know how far to get over and got a little too far over on the road and turned the car over. Broke Grandmother's ankle, so. And I'm sure he was very aggravated. He was an early rural post delivery man that would have gone on horseback or in the little wagons. So I'm sure he was very aggravated when the cars started. And you read a lot of articles about the horse meeting the car at the bridge and accidents that happened because of the horses scared from the noise of the vehicle.
Remember back when you were kids?
Yes.
And tell me what your parents or your relatives or whomever, did they have any comments about cars coming of age and how horses were being forgotten about, and now the automobile was now the new thing? Did they have any comments about that?
Well, my dad purchased a new Model T Ford in 1917 as the first car he had, and we had bad roads, so we didn't get to drive it very much. Might get to church on Sunday in the summertime, but we drove it very little. Took an hour and a half to make it. With only gravel roads from Fulton out to the top of Richland Hill, the rest of it mud roads from there on. So he had to wait till he got a good drive day to go.
Well, Bill, any thoughts on that?
Well, Harris Lee got 10 years on me, so he has the advantage there. He has a definite advantage there. The first vehicle that I remember in our family was about a 1928 or 29 Nash sedan with big disc wheels. But by that time, the furor of horses, mules versus vehicles had evaporated.
Sure. Would you say after World War I, it was pretty much it was over for the horses?
Absolutely. Mules too.
Right.
My dad had 30 mules when the war stopped, and there wasn't no market for mules anymore, so
Right.
he got hurt with mules.
Were you saying that it was annoying having all the vehicles in the when you're out living in the countryside? Was it the new vehicles annoying at all? What was the comment
It was
on that?
bothering the horses. Horses weren't used to them. Sometimes man had to stop his car and let the horse go by. See,
Sure.
then he'd start up and get out of the way. Then see.
So, what was your favorite tourist place? Like, what was your favorite trip in the 50s and 60s? Your favorite family trip?
Well, we didn't have the money to go on any trips. Just farthest I was ever on a trip was up until I was big enough to have my own car would be like Sykeston in Missouri, Mexico, and Sykeston. We had relation there. We'd go stay a week, and then I did have a trip when I finished grade school. The state operated what they call a state fair school to give a free trip to one boy. Each county did 114 counties, did 114 boys there. And I won a trip to Sedalia Fair. That was my first travel. I went to Jeff City on a train, got on a bus, rode to Sedalia, got on a streetcar, rode out to fairgrounds. And then we were housed in a tent out there, and our job was clean up after the grandstand, afternoon performance, get the papers and stuff, wipe seats off, clean it up for the night. And that's all we had to do. We had to go to school in the daytime. We were educated a little bit. And that's kind of got me started in the fair business. My uncle raised watermelons. I wound up with a watermelon stand in high school. It's fair, and that got me in concession business.
Little indentured servitude there to get you to come up. How about you, Bill? What's your favorite trip?
Well, it didn't take too long for the park situation to step into the deal, and there were 5 or 6 parks that state-owned, state-run parks that you could go to that were very interesting. Bennett Springs, Elephant Rocks. A non-state thing that used to be quite an attraction was Tom Sauk Mountain that General Electric, not General Electric, but Union Electric had built on the top of a mountain down southeast corner of the state. The one that the side blew out, washed out of, about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
That ruined Elephant Rocks Park. But people would make a caravan, a tour to see that because it was a monster bowl of water on top of a pretty high mountain.
Now there's tourist courts where you stopped with your car and you had your bedroll or whatever,
Tents,
a tent,
yeah,
and
probably.
what have you, kind of like a campground there.
And when the Lake of the Ozarks started, that was little cabins. They had
Oh,
their little
yes, everybody got
cabins,
a
and
little
that was
cabin.
their motel. Well, we had the tourist court
Right.
going up 54 up Hockaday Hill with the little bitty little houses, little miniature houses, like I guess.
Things like gas stations and diners and tourist stop places. What was that like when that first started? When did you see that, started noticing the America growing around the road, so to speak?
Well, the roads, the vehicles forced the roads. The roads had to come because the vehicles were there, and they could not negotiate the mud roads. The old wagons being pulled by the horses or by the mules, they could handle it, but you're moving along at maybe 5 miles, 6 miles an hour. The car, even in low gear, was going to run probably 15 miles an hour. But follow those tracks that wagon had made, and those early cars were made to fit those wagon tracks, by the way.
Yeah.
And you look at the narrow wheels on the early cars, they fit those wagon tracks. And then you take some of them that with the solid rubber tires and what you call high wheelers, they were made specifically to do a super job of handling those wagon tracks. They would go right on, cut down through the mud to something solid, and they could just keep on going. But anyway, everybody knew that there had to be a revolution or improvement in the roads. So you started to see them bladed up, and then you started to see some, well, they used to call them macadam, remember?
Yeah, macadam.
But macadam is nothing but a gravel road. Anytime you see the word macadam, well, just say gravel, because that's what it was. And so they were quite an improvement. If they had enough gravel on it, well, they'd hold you up. And then the bigger tires, the wider tires, well, the gravel would hold you up. Macadam would hold you up. So they put wider tires, and then they went to balloon tires, what they call balloon tires. You don't hear that term anymore, do you?
Yeah,
Huh?
right.
Advancing automobile technology and improved roads gave folks a level of personal freedom that they had never experienced before. Cars allowed one to travel more easily, and they were fun and exciting. Seeking recreation or thrills in the automobile quickly came into fashion as Americans began to accept cars as a part of their daily life. They began to do everything in their cars, eat in them, vacation in them, and even date in them. As autos became more mechanically reliable, car makers began to make them more beautiful. Car design emerged as a new art form, and entire industries were created in support of the automobile and the people who traveled in them. But this boom in the auto industry was to face interesting times. Growing unrest amongst the working class led to labor union movements across the world. As economies began to fall, some of these movements gained strength and created upheavals in companies and countries alike. Weakened European governments, unregulated and inflated stock markets, and plain old greed would result in a worldwide depression that would kill off a large portion of the auto industry. After the American stock market crash in 1928, very few Americans could afford to buy new cars.